Pizza Connection True Crime. How FBI Cracked It. It's 1982. New York City. Over 400,000 people are addicted to heroin. Murders top 1,600 in a single year. Streets in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Queens are being swallowed whole by an epidemic that nobody seems able to stop. But the FBI has a problem. They know who's behind it. They just can't prove it. Then, something small catches an agent's eye. Something almost laughably ordinary. A baker from Sicily. A string of pizza parlors stretching from Queens to Wisconsin. And a phone call made from a payphone in code. So clever, so careful, that it would take years for anyone to crack it. What agents were about to stumble into wasn't just a drug case. It was the largest international heroin pipeline in American history, worth an estimated $1.65 billion, run by two of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the planet, hidden in plain sight behind the smell of tomato sauce and mozzarella. This is the Pizza Connection. And once you understand how it worked, you'll never look at a neighborhood pizza shop the same way again. True crime documentary fans, this is just the beginning. Like, share, and subscribe to follow every twist and turn in history's most unbelievable cases. To understand the Pizza Connection, you have to go back to Sicily, to a culture of silence, loyalty, and blood that had been perfecting itself for over a century. The Sicilian Mafia, known internally as Cosa Nostra, our thing, was a deeply hierarchical criminal organization rooted in the villages and towns of western Sicily. Unlike its American counterparts, who had gradually diversified and in some cases softened their operations, the Sicilian factions were rigid, clannish, and ruthless. When they arrived in the United States, they didn't assimilate into American mob life. They operated alongside it, parallel to it, maintaining allegiances that ran back to the old country. In the Bonanno crime family of New York, a tight circle of Sicilian-born members operated with such secrecy that American mobsters couldn't penetrate them. These men were called the Zips, a slang term used by American mafiosi to describe the Sicilians they considered foreign and insular. The Zips reported not just to Bonanno leadership, but ultimately to their Sicilian bosses back home. They were a criminal embassy embedded in a criminal state. At the center of this world was a man named Salvatore Catalano, a quiet, heavy-set Sicilian immigrant who ran a bakery on Knickerbocker Avenue in Brooklyn. On the surface, he was a businessman, a baker, a family man. In reality, Catalano was one of the most powerful figures in an international heroin operation that would eventually flood American streets with hundreds of kilograms of the drug every year. On the other side of the Atlantic sat Gaetano Badalamenti, a former boss of the Sicilian Mafia Commission who had been expelled from that body in a violent internal power struggle with the fearsome Corleonesi clan. Badalamenti was a ghost. A man operating from the shadows of Brazil, Spain, and Italy, communicating through carefully coded phone calls to a network of relatives and associates spread across the eastern United States. Dangerous, calculating, and desperate for revenue, Badalamenti saw the American market as his lifeline. Together, and sometimes in bitter competition, these two men sat at the top of the most sophisticated drug trafficking conspiracy ever prosecuted in US history. The operation was almost elegant in its simplicity, and almost impossible to trace in its complexity. It began in Turkey. Farmers in the poppy fields of the Turkish countryside grew the raw material, opium, which was processed into morphine base. Sicilian buyers, connected through mafia networks stretching back decades, purchased that morphine base and transported it to clandestine heroin refineries operating across the Palermo region. In 1980, Italian investigators discovered one such refinery in the Pironeto district near Palermo's airport. It was sophisticated, professional, and it was just one of many. From Sicily, the refined heroin was smuggled into the United States. It was hidden inside shipments of legitimate goods, machinery, cheese, other food products, anything that could cross borders without suspicion. Once it arrived in America, it moved through a network of distributors tied to Sicilian-run businesses, primarily pizza parlors. The pizza shops were perfect covers. They were cash-heavy businesses by nature. A restaurant generating thousands of dollars daily in small bills raised no immediate suspicion. Heroin profits could be folded seamlessly into legitimate revenue and then moved, through couriers carrying cash in boxes and luggage, to banks and brokerage accounts in Switzerland and elsewhere. From January 1975 to April 1984, investigators later determined that approximately $1.65 billion worth of heroin passed through this network. That's not a typo. Billion, with a B. The scale of it was staggering. For context, the famous French Connection case of the 1960s had involved roughly 44 kilograms of heroin. The Pizza Connection distributed what investigators estimated to be as much as 1 metric ton. And all of it, hidden behind pizza ovens and flour-dusted counters across America. The FBI's New York office opened its initial investigation in February 1980. The target, Salvatore Catalano. Agents from the FBI Special Operations Group began conducting fixed surveillance on Knickerbocker Avenue and the surrounding Bonanno stronghold in Brooklyn. What they saw was puzzling at first. Men coming and going, not behaving like ordinary businessmen, unexplained wealth among Sicilian-owned restaurants and cafes. But they needed more. The breakthrough, one that had already been years in the making, came from inside the Bonanno crime family itself. Joe Pistone, an FBI special agent who had spent years undercover using the alias Donnie Brasco, had infiltrated the Bonanno family beginning in 1976. His work, later immortalized in his memoir and the 1997 film Donnie Brasco, laid crucial groundwork by exposing the deep Sicilian connections within the family. While Pistone's undercover work predated the formal Pizza Connection investigation, his intelligence formed a foundation that case agents would build upon for years. In 1982, Congress granted the FBI concurrent jurisdiction with the DEA over narcotics violations. This was a turning point. Suddenly, the FBI could pursue the heroin angle directly. Wiretap orders were authorized, eventually more than 200 of them. The intercepts began accumulating at a staggering rate. Phone calls made in coded Sicilian dialect, references to shirts and suits and the merchandise that agents knew referred to drug shipments, fragments of conversations that alone meant nothing, but when assembled, told the full story of an empire. The challenge was translation. The Sicilian dialect used in the calls was different enough from standard Italian that the FBI had to recruit specialized translators, including, memorably, a multilingual former housewife working in the Bureau's closed file section who was pressed into service as the investigation grew. Teams in Newark, Philadelphia, Chicago, Springfield, and Milwaukee all launched parallel wiretap operations as the network's reach became clear. Then came a piece of evidence that seemed almost too cinematic to be real. During a mafia wedding in 1980, the FBI surveillance team managed to obtain photographs from the event. The photos were a who's who of the Sicilian and American mafia, faces, connections, relationships all documented in a single afternoon. Those wedding photographs, investigators would later note, were used in organized crime prosecutions for the next 3 decades. Meanwhile, DEA agents were seizing heroin shipments around the world. Palm prints lifted from the wrapping of a kilogram of heroin purchased in an undercover operation matched defendants in the case. Financial ledgers, shipping manifests, cash seizures. The mountain of evidence grew. By 1984, investigators had enough. Arrests were made at Palermo's airport when key traffickers were caught trying to smuggle large amounts of cash. A coordinated roundup followed in the United States. Nearly 30 mafia members and associates pulled in by agents across 6 FBI offices in a single day. The Pizza Connection had been busted open. The trial that followed was unlike anything American courts had ever seen. United States versus Badalamenti et al. Opened on September 30, 1985, before the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. There were 22 defendants, all Sicilian-born men. Many of them spoke little to no English. Earpieces for translation were a constant fixture in the courtroom. The gallery was packed with reporters, legal scholars, and observers from law enforcement agencies across multiple countries. The lead prosecutor was Louis Freeh, a man who would go on to become a federal judge and, later, director of the FBI. Alongside him was Richard A. Martin. The prosecution was overseen under the broader organized crime strategy championed by U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani, who was simultaneously pursuing the landmark Mafia Commission trial. What Freeh and his team had assembled was extraordinary. Approximately 15,000 pieces of evidence. Evidence drawn from 55,000 wiretap intercepts. 300 witnesses, including, crucially, 2 Sicilian Mafia turncoats, Tommaso Buscetta and Salvatore Contorno, whose first-hand accounts of the Sicilian Mafia's internal structure and operations gave the jury a window into a world they had never imagined existed. Contorno described one meeting in Sicily where he watched defendants handle packages of white powder in a factory, cutting the bags, testing the contents, marking them with tiny scissor cuts to identify ownership. The DEA later seized 40 kilograms of 85% pure heroin bearing those same markings. Street value, upward of $80 million. The trial was grueling. The prosecution's case alone took a full year to present. Jurors, who were not permitted to take notes for much of the proceedings, sat through months of technical evidence, wiretap transcripts read into the record, and expert testimony spanning 4 continents. During the trial, one defendant, Gaetano was murdered, gunned down on December 1, 1985. Likely a result of internal mafia conflict over cooperation and blame. Another defendant was shot and nearly killed. The violence underscored how high the stakes were for the men in the dock. Most remarkably, Gaetano Badalamenti, the former Sicilian Mafia boss, the ghost who had spent years on the run, chose to testify in his own defense. He admitted he was a member of Cosa Nostra. He denied the drug charges. He claimed his coded telephone conversations and financial dealings had nothing to do with narcotics, but refused to explain what they were actually about, citing his right not to incriminate himself in Italy. His testimony was widely regarded by legal observers as catastrophically damaging to his own case. On March 2, 1987, after 17 months, making it the longest criminal jury trial in the history of the United States, the jury returned its verdicts. 18 convictions. On June 22, 1987, Judge Pierre Level handed down sentences. Gaetano Badalamenti received 45 years in federal prison. Salvatore Catalano, who had pleaded guilty during proceedings, also received 45 years. Other defendants received sentences ranging from 12 to 20 years. The entire case had cost approximately $50 million to prosecute, a figure the government considered justified by what it had destroyed. The conviction sent shockwaves well beyond the courtroom. At the street level, the effect was measurable. DE data documented a 25% drop in heroin flows from Italy to the United States by 1984, even as the investigation was still underway. Between 1985 and 1988, as prosecutions intensified and Sicilian refineries were seized by Italian authorities, that reduction deepened significantly. But the legacy of the pizza connection went far beyond disrupting one drug pipeline. It was, as former FBI Director Louis Freeh later described it, the FBI's first major, transnational criminal enterprise investigation and prosecution, and a historic turning point for international police cooperation and coordinated enforcement action. During the course of the case, the United States and Italy entered into new treaties on extradition and mutual legal assistance, frameworks that enabled law enforcement on both sides of the Atlantic to share evidence, coordinate arrests, and extradite suspects with an efficiency that had never existed before. Central to the Italian side of that partnership was Judge Giovanni Falcone, a Sicilian-born magistrate who had worked tirelessly to map the internal structure of Cosa Nostra. Falcone shared intelligence with his American counterparts, helped coordinate prosecutions in Italy, and became an international symbol of judicial courage in the fight against the Mafia. Tragically, on May 23, 1992, Falcone was assassinated along with his wife and 3 bodyguards when Cosa Nostra detonated a massive bomb under the highway near Palermo. He was 53 years old. The world mourned. Italy erupted. His death, paradoxically, strengthened the anti-Mafia resolve of the Italian state. The pizza connection also established a template for using the RICO Act, the racketeer-influenced and corrupt organization statute, to dismantle entire criminal enterprises rather than prosecuting isolated individuals. Forfeiture provisions allowed the government to seize approximately $38 million in laundered assets. The model pioneered here was replicated in the simultaneous Mafia Commission trial, where 9 New York crime family bosses were convicted, and in countless organized crime prosecutions in the decades that followed. It also transformed how the FBI operated internationally. The case necessitated and then strengthened the Bureau's network of legal attaché offices abroad, offices that today play a critical role in addressing terrorism, cybercrime, and transnational criminal organizations. And Joe Pistone, the agent who went under as Donnie Brasco and whose years of sacrifice helped make the case possible, became a lasting figure in American law enforcement history. His story is required reading at the FBI Academy. The mob had reportedly placed a contract on his life. He lived. The men he helped convict did not fare nearly as well. Gaetano Badalamenti served his sentence in federal custody. He died of heart failure at the age of 80 at the Devon's Federal Medical Center. A man who had once commanded the Sicilian Mafia Commission, reduced at the end to a number on a prison manifest. Salvatore Catalano served his time and was eventually released. His Knickerbocker Avenue operation was gone. The world he had helped build was dismantled. One of the lesser defendants, sentenced to 15 years, was released in 1995 after serving 8 years and returned to his suburban New Jersey home. In 1999, he and his son were found dead in the basement. The deaths ruled a double suicide. A grim postscript to a grim story. The pizza parlors returned to being, or at least appeared to be, just pizza parlors. There's something almost absurd about it, when you step back. A $1.65 billion heroin empire. A conspiracy that touched Turkey, Sicily, Switzerland, Brazil, Spain, and a dozen other countries. A criminal network that fed the addiction crisis devastating American cities in the early 1980s, and it was threaded through pizza shops. Not yachts. Not offshore shell companies in gleaming glass towers. Pizza shops. The genius of the pizza connection was its ordinariness. The men who ran it understood that the best hiding place for something extraordinary is something completely mundane. Americans don't look twice at a pizza shop. They don't question cash transactions at the counter. They don't wonder why a Sicilian immigrant with a modest business drives a nice car. But the FBI did wonder. And they kept wondering, 4 years, through thousands of hours of surveillance and hundreds of thousands of wiretapped words spoken in a dialect that barely anyone on the task force could understand, until the whole thing unraveled. The case left behind a legal architecture, treaties, task forces, RICO precedents, international partnerships, that still shapes how law enforcement fights organized crime today. It proved that transnational criminal networks, no matter how carefully constructed, are not impervious. That patience and procedure can accomplish what brute force never could. And it proved something else, something the criminals themselves seem to forget. The bigger you build something, the more it has to communicate with itself. And every communication is a vulnerability. One payphone. One coded call. One agent listening carefully enough to notice the pattern. Sometimes that's all it takes. If you love true crime stories, you're in the right place. Check out more videos on Crime Chronicles. Like, share, subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching.